those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Hussey, the photographer guy. So I got an email from John 2.5, 3 years ago, probably close to 3. He said, I've got this body of poetry. I'm wondering if you happen to have any black and white photos that might work well with some of these poems. And I read through the poetry, and truth be told, I don't like poetry. But
He doesn't.
But there were some themes in what John had written that were very familiar to me. And as I was reading through these things, I was, instead of thinking about, do I have a photo for that, do I have a photo for this, I was seeing what I would create for photos. And having recently just sort of refurbished a medium format film camera that was my father's back in the 1970s, and getting that working again, I wanted to have a project that I could sink my teeth into, just from a creative and technical standpoint, where I could work with old vintage black and white film again and develop it by hand. And so I contacted John and said, well, I don't have photos for this, but let's create them. And it took a little over 2 years, but we were able to get through it all. We did the photography mostly in 2 different blocks. Once in the summer of 2016, 17, 16? It's a long time ago. And then in the winter of 2017. What you see here, this is the very first photo that we took, the very first day. It's currently called Reflection. It used to be called something else.
Yeah.
I don't remember what. But
some of this stuff changed over time.
We wanted to have a photo of him punching, and this is actually John punching the mirror. We knew we wanted to have a photo of the guy punching the mirror. And we were thinking, well, how do we do that safely? John's like, well, I'll just punch mirror. And I'm thinking, whoa.
I know how to do this.
You write with that hand. You shouldn't be punching a mirror. So the original thought was, well, we'll get a mirror and maybe we'll just like drop a 10-pound bag of flour on it to shatter it, and then we'll take, we didn't know what, we'd maybe tape it all back together, which seemed very convoluted. So we end up over at Penelope's trying to find the right mirror, and we ended up with that one. By right, we mean it was glass and it would break easy, and it had to be sort of built rather shoddily so that it would break very easily. And I got the shot framed up. We got everything lined up just right. I put some modeling clay either on the mirror or on your knuckles. I think it was on the mirror, so that when he punched the modeling clay. Do not do this, ever. We went through a lot of the photos in this book. There were a lot of safety things that you would not know were happening behind the scenes. However, the one thing this is at my studio when I was on Marlborough Street. We had drop cloths on the floor to collect all the glass, and everything all set. I'm concerned about John's safety. And then just as he goes and he swings, as I'm clicking the shutter, I think, oh my God, I'm kneeling down like this, and I realize I don't have any safety glasses on. I close my eyes, and a rain of glass comes down on my hair, down the back of my shirt.
But you still...
That was the first shot, though. I still managed to get the shot.
You still clicked the camera.
And you can see the little bits of glass flying through the air, heading toward the camera. The ones here that are getting bigger, yeah, coming right at me.
So all of these photos too were done on film, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So there's no Photoshop wizardry in that. That actually is happening as you see it. And yes, glass was showering down, and well, I don't know about we. I decided that maybe we needed to pay more attention to safety.
And
for the next 49 photos.
Even though I was punching into clay, I really did get into it, and I actually did cut my hand on that. On that tape.
We shot an entire roll of film, but the first shot was the keeper, because it was a real one. He really is. You see the look. I don't know if you can see the look in his face, but he's really getting into it. He hit it very hard. and the glass really did go flying just like that. So we had, on that first weekend, being the photographer, I was kind of, in many cases, I was the only one who actually understood what it was going to take to do certain things. And we had 50 photo concepts lined up, and John was sure that we could just knock all 50 out in one weekend. Well, if you're shooting for 25 hours and you complete a photo every 30 minutes, you can do it. I think it was a little more grueling than John was prepared for. So the second block of photos that we did, we toned the pace down a little bit, but that first weekend was an absolute, just brutal slog to get through it. This will come back as part of the story when we talk about the cover photo in a little while. So if you want to go ahead and read that.
So I'll go ahead and read the poem that goes with this photo. And just so you know, we're doing the stories about the photos first, but the photos were actually, the concepts for the photos came from the poetry first. And the name of this poem is called Reflection. And when I wrote it, it's the one poem in the book that if you look at the photo before you finish reading the poem, it actually detracts a little bit from the value of it. But there's no way around it, and you'll get what I'm saying when I read it. So it's called Reflection. So difficult not to stare. He doesn't deserve to be acknowledged, but I can't help it. When I see him, I think about the wreckage he's left behind, and I think about everyone he's hurt along the way. He's taken destruction to a new level. The only thing he's managed to refine in life is his duplicity. We'd be better off without him. It should end. But somehow, death would be too kind. He sees me looking, staring back purposefully with those judging eyes. Suddenly, I want to strike him. He needs to be punished for all of it. I scream at him, but he screams as well, startling me. And I punch him in the face with all my strength, furious. He hits me back with equivalent anger. I stagger, overcome and crying. Blood drips to the bathroom floor, and I slump down on the toilet to think some more, picking splinters of glass from my hand. So that's a pretty, it's pretty dark, it's a pretty dark, raw thought. And, you can understand, I think, why the photo, if you see the photo first, it kind of takes away from the poem a little bit, but together they work great. And the beginning of this book is dark. It's like this for the first 40% of the book, but it does, by degrees, get better and better. One of the comments that I have gotten from some people is that it's too dark. The book doesn't get happy fast enough.
That's the way darkness is in life. It kind of feels like you're never getting out of it.
And that's my response to them. I'm like, in what world can you snap your fingers and dig your way out of despair and loss? Show me and I will be there. But in my experience, it takes a lot of hard work. There's a lot of fixing and difficult things that you have to get through along the way. And it's that journey, it's that difficulty that adds value to what you've accomplished when you get there. Because you remember how hard it was. And you're able to look back where you were and say, I remember how hard it was to get away from it. That's what's...
Next photo. This is not the next photo. Remember when I said that sometimes as the photographer, you're the only one who actually knows what's actually going to happen. And I don't know how many people are here because they're interested in photography, but this is Madame Cherie's. And as you can see, you really can't see anything. This is what Madame Cherie's looks like on black and white film. I don't know who here is familiar with Madame Cherie's. It's this old stone staircase going up in the middle of the woods. And in the middle of the summer, on black and white film, it kind of looks like an absolute mess. That is what it looks like in the wintertime. And while I tried very hard to help people that were involved in the shoot, the model and the stylist and John, understand that this is not going to work. There's no point in going. Please, let's not waste the time. My God, we only have 30 minutes per photo. Don't make me spend 2 hours doing this one.
I made him do it.
Yeah, and at some point, yes, so Tina, you were asking about the working relationship. That's why I'm speaking of this. Yeah, at some point you just have to say, okay, let's do it. You'll see. And so we did it, and we saw. And so we ended up going back in January or February and shooting this again. And when we got there,
It's about 10 degrees.
there's some roses. Somebody left a small bouquet of yellow roses with a yellow ribbon on the stairs. And John was getting ready to throw them off the side. I'm like, no, keep them. We're gonna we used them in another shot too. And Anna, our model, is not standing there.
She's
Never
not really standing
Never
there.
go up those stairs in the winter. They're icy. There's nothing that it is not safe. So I just want to make that clear. In the summer, she went up there. In the winter, I would not allow it to happen. So what we ended up doing is we shot this without her, and then I also shot on the same roll of film the next day from the same angle at the same distance using the same lens on the same roll of film so that it would be developed the same. I shot a photo of her at the top of a tall staircase, and then using Photoshop we put it together. But this is one of those things that never do this in the winter. It's not safe. Don't even.
There's a lot of science involved in what you're doing.
Yeah, there was some trigonometry. There was a little.
Science and math, yeah, absolutely.
But if you look at like well, some of the photos, you'll see that they have a lot of contrast, some of them don't. And the creative decisions that we make when working with film are made before we click the shutter, before we can put the roll of film in the camera. You know, do I want this to be a dark, high contrast photo? Do I want it to be something light and airy with a lot of detail? And those creative decisions all have to be made before you actually click the shutter. And then how I go about developing the film changes the overall look. Is it going to be smooth and silky, or is it going to be really contrast? Are the edges going to be really crisp? There are different techniques you can use in actually developing the film to do that. So it was important that when I shot these two photos, I shot them on the same roll of film so that as I was developing that roll of film, they'd get developed using the same technique, and so it looks very seamless. It's hard to tell where one photo ends and the other one begins, but the sun is back there behind those trees, and we did light up a white wall directly behind her in the same exact spot so that we were sure that everything would just line up perfectly.
And this photo won an award. It was a runner-up. So it won second place in a contest with an art, a literary and art magazine.
So that's the stairwell in the back of the studio when I was over on Marlborough Street.
If you look carefully, you can see
You
Scott
way
way down at the
down
bottom right.
there, yeah. And that's the same angle. This is John was taking her this photo from off to the side, and that's the same basic moment when we shot that.
Okay, so now I'll go ahead and read the poem for this. The name of this raw thought is called Subsistence of Loss. And subsistence means feeding, right? Keeping something alive. And Tina, if I'm wrong, you tell me.
English teacher.
And so this is another kind of, dark one. And it comes from, this thought. I have this other poem that is actually going to be in the sequel to this book called Deference for Despair. And that's, it comes from this place where people can find themselves in a place where all they know is despair or all they have is loss. And so they find themselves in a really weird, bad place where they almost embrace it, because it's all that they have. And in this case, this poem is about the loss of love and the subsistence of the loss of it, right? Being confused with, maybe a good thing. But let me go ahead and read it. Subsistence of loss. Better to have loved and lost. So it is true, and yet, in this exists so much sorrow, a sorrow that fades with time, they say. But they are wrong. The memories fade, the details, the colors, tastes, sounds, and moments, delicates as air in the vacuum of space. But the vast attendant nothing fills inexorably with heartache, a sorrow that endures. They never knew love, or they never lost. Where the rarefied air of true love persists, it is there, beyond breath, yet preserved in the cold constancy of sadness. The need to breathe, air so intrinsic to life. So is love the sole averiment of ever having been truly alive. To have known love and lost leaves one disconsolate and voided, forever seeking some course of revival, a way to bring it back, to breathe again. So love is kind of a common theme throughout the book, and at the end of the day, people just want to be happy, and I think, in my experience, love is the key to that. And so it has to be a common theme.
All right, this was originally our idea for the cover of the book. I think our publisher did us a huge favor by saying no and putting it on the back. Because the photo that we did use for the cover, I think is the right photo.
It's the best photo.
Stefan really made a wise decision in shooting this one down for the cover. This looks like it's just some like mysterious, foggy place. We're actually out in the middle of the day in the front yard of an Airbnb in Putney, Vermont. It's amazing what you can do with a little strobe and a fog machine in the middle of the day. We're going to show you some behind-the-scenes photos on this as well. And this is the case where, when working with a professional model, a lot of times the models want to look pretty. She brought wardrobe that she wanted to wear that was really fancy. And it's like, no, but we're not trying to make you look good. In fact, most of these photos, we're going to make you look really bad. Sorry.
We're going to streak your mascara.
We let her put on her fanciest dress, and then you can hardly see. But this Deb Gaudreau, who owns Salon Exodus over in Peterborough, she was the stylist for us for this weekend. And she took this behind the scenes photo. You can see, very nice dress. And there's John operating the fog machine. And I'm over there on the side. I'm shooting initially with a digital camera, because what we did with a lot of photos is we'd frame everything up. When we had some technical things that we needed to work through, we'd shoot them on digital first, and then once we had all the technical stuff figured out for what exactly we needed to do, because we only had a half hour to do it, we couldn't screw around too much, then we put the film camera in place. So this is what was actually happening as we were getting this shot set. And then that's just another angle of it. That's Anna Apostolova, our model again. Beautiful dress. But on this bright, sunny day in this front yard.
That's the final shot.
So again, it's one of those situations where the only person who knew what the photo was going to look like was the person behind the camera, and sometimes trying to convince everybody that no, really, this is going to look, just trust me. It was a little frustrating, Tina. So, but by the time the first round of photos were done, I think if I tell John that ain't gonna work, it ain't gonna work. If I tell them it's going to look a certain way, we know it's going to look a certain way. But we actually developed through going through this, we developed a pretty good working relationship, and we sort of developed a good language for being able to communicate with each other about how to create photos to take. Because when John first gave me these poems, he sent me 50 poems, and about 40 of them, I saw what I wanted to do for those photos. I knew pretty much what I wanted to do. There were about 10 of them where I was like, I got nothing. And to go from I got nothing to taking the image in John's head and making it be an image in my head, that took some work between the two of us. And it was necessary for us to come back 7-8 months after we did the first shoot and be able to sort of realize those visions for some of the things that I wanted to execute that just never got executed properly because we didn't have time, or it was July, not February, or the things that John wanted to get done that for whatever reason we never fully communicated with each other. But this is one of those shots where we had an original concept. We both kind of knew what the concept was, but it took a lot of trust from everybody else to believe that what you saw here was going to turn into that.
So, just a note on the photography in general. I didn't explain this at the beginning, but I came up with the idea of adding photography. What I didn't want to do was take all this poetry I had created, even with a philosophy and arranging it, and what I didn't want to do was to be that 34,000th person this year to publish their book of poetry, right? Because these books do not sell. Poetry books don't sell. People are lucky to sell a few hundred, and most of those they know the people. And this isn't too much of an exception, except for the fact that it was nominated for the National Book Award, which is huge. There's poetry in here that is about to be nominated for the Pushcart Prize, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that. I just found out yesterday. So this is something, right? It's not, but it's something because of the photography. It's something because of the philosophy that I built into the kind of the flow of the book. And at first I thought, I'll just do photography, and I went through, I'm like, I have all these photographs of, pictures that I've taken. So I started going through my photos to see if there was even one that I would consider pairing with the poetry, and I couldn't find one. Nothing. And so. And
John is a good photographer. He's a legitimately good photographer. He's got a good eye, but yeah.
He has actually taught me about half of what I know. He's taught me the artistic parts of what I know. I know the mechanical, how to operate the camera and get what I want and that sort of thing. The bottom line is that's when I realized I have got to find someone who knows what the heck they're doing, a professional photographer that can do this, and that's when I turned to Scott. And I think I sent him a note on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm doing, are you interested? And he wrote back, in a word, yes. And then he came up with the idea to use film instead of digital, and came up with all these other great artistic ideas, which I'm not going to talk too much about because it's yours, but let me go ahead and read the poem that goes with this one. It's very short. It's called Leaving Nothing. Shadows dance and gather round. Colors fade to black and white. Silence takes the place of sound. Love drifts slowly out of sight. Dream state pictures fill my mind. Vague, pale echoes of her kiss. Swirling mists converge, unwind, leaving nothing. Emptiness. And again, this is another one about love, lost love. And I tried very, very hard to, when I wrote the poems. This is very short, but I think it's also it hits me here, and I think it hits other people there too. Some poems more than others for some people. But I try to make everything very evocative, and I think I succeeded in that, and that's why the book has been nominated the way it has.
Our next one. Remember we were talking about safety? Yeah. Yeah. Here's another one. The studio that I used to be in when we shot this, if you climb out onto the roof, there were a couple of different roofs that were about 4 or 5 feet. One was a little higher than the other. And we went to Walmart and we found the largest air mattresses we could find. We got 2 queen size air mattresses. The bottom one was filled about halfway, and the top one was filled pretty much all the way. I thought maybe we should have had a third, but he felt confident. This is something I could have done once. He did it about 20 times. We shot 2 rolls of film. I get 12 shots per roll. I think we did at least 20 times. John launched himself off the roof and landed just splatting on this mattress over and over and over again.
And there was enough distance where, because I'm jumping up and out,
Yeah.
there's enough distance where by the time you hit, you're hitting hard, right? But not enough distance to brace yourself, because if I started bracing myself, it would ruin the shot. So I literally had to not brace myself and hit,
And there are a lot of photos where he's like this.
It's really hard to not brace yourself. It's hard to do.
This was one of the last photos that we took. I think he just got numb at a certain point. And fortunately, we were far enough away from the edge of the lower roof so that if he bounced, he didn't go off the edge of the building. But yeah, again, kids, don't try this at home.
Thank you for saying that in front of his mother.
Trained professionals.
So the poem that goes with this photo is called "A Little Emptier." Despondent, treading the edges of fear, alone, devoid of control. Who's there to avail me? Why am I here? Want answers, it's taking a toll. Wandering aimlessly, nameless faces, oblivious, no help at all. Falling down, backing up, of all places, with my back up against the wall. Even when dreaming, I'm falling so fast. Then waking, last second, eyes wide, and feeling, after the terror has passed, a little emptier inside.
This is called Insanity. I think it was something different originally, but this was a shot that I had absolutely no vision on, and John had this concept in his head, and it took a little bit to get the picture from his head into my head, and then we also had to get it into Anna's head. And this is a single piece of film. There's no Photoshop on this. There's no trickery. One shutter click. It's about a 8-second exposure, and I popped the flash multiple times. We were in a completely darkened room, and we basically told her, you're going to start over here looking like, then you're going to look a little lost, and then you're going to look like whatever. And so what she would do is she'd start over here, and she moved. And I popped the flash one time here, I popped it 2 times there, and I popped it 1 time there. So that one in the middle, she's twice as bright as the others.
It's completely jet black dark in the studio.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are no windows.
Yeah.
So the only light is when he pops the strobe. That's why this works.
Yeah. And the shininess of the black leather jacket. I mean, it looks like she's a 3-headed beast. I mean, I was so happy when I saw this thing, when I developed the film and hung it up, and I was like, oh. I didn't think it was going to be that good, but it came out very well, so go for it.
Well, it did, and it is called Insanity, and the poem is called Insanity. And you know, the idea of insanity, you may have heard, is when you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, and that's kind of what this is. And so this poem, it's a little further on in the book. It's on page 34, and even though it still seems kind of dark or negative, it's not like the other ones, right? It's not contemplation of suicide dark. It's not, you know, complete loss of love dark. This is more, it's starting to become a little bit, I don't know, you know, more thoughtful, right? It's still maybe, it's more like the poem is talking about, you know, am I doing the right thing, right? By doing things over and over again and not getting the result I want, and which is kind of what I was trying to get to when I wrote it. Insanity. Do it again, do it again, do it again. Why can't I get it right? Am I mad? Or does this qualify as practice makes perfect? Does me worrying about psychosis imply a likelihood that my mind is in fact bent? Or is it a good thing that I'm conscious of the possibility and therefore more effectual in preventing or subduing it? And further, if I'm having so much trouble trying to decide which of those questions is most salient, is it possible I may already know and know the answer as well? An answer I don't wish to acknowledge? Then there's always the possibility I'm overthinking things, worrying for nothing. Perhaps it is better to get on in life, get on with life, with so much to do. Do it again, do it again, do it again.
This photo is called Hell. We had, well, it was one that I had no vision on at all. And John had, well, his own words. Let's see here. Backstory of all the cliche ideas we had at first. Yeah, a lot of cliche ideas, you know, standing in front of a bonfire, trying to do something to make it look like,
Pitchfork,
like actual
horns,
hell.
yeah.
And this is in a studio I was in at the time, had this old manufacturing, disused manufacturing space out back, and had this really gritty floor. And I just had him go sit in this little tiny patch of light and hang his head. And, you know, hell a lot of times isn't the circumstance that you're in, it's what's going on inside of you while you're in it. That's what makes it so terrible. And one of the creative decisions that I made with this, in addition to, you know, the type of film that I use to get a dark contrast kind of look with a lot of deep detail, the type of techniques that I use for developing the film to try to give it sort of a gritty, grungier look. When you develop film, inherently you're going to end up with little tiny specks of dust on it. There's dust all around us all the time. So whenever you scan film, the first step is clean it. I deliberately didn't clean this film when I scanned it. All those little specks, it just adds to that sort of dirty, gritty yuck of what's going on in the photo. But it's one of those things where, like I said, a lot of times digital photographers, people who learned in the era of digital, they'll take a photo and then they get it into the computer and then they try to figure out all the creative decisions they're going to do with it. Whereas when working with film, all those creative decisions are made before you even load the film in the camera. You know the end result that you're going to. And right down to not cleaning the film, those decisions were made before we even snapped the shutter on this.
And So hell is it comes just before kind of the cathartic place in the book, and you know, it's the first part of the book that mentions hope, and so while it still is a very dark, you know, a dark poem and a dark photo, it kind of represents the bottom, right? If you can picture or think about someone reaching their bottom, that's
One thing to note, he's actually in a bright space. He's in a bright spot. He's not in darkness. The darkness is sort of surrounding him a little bit and inside of him, but he's actually sitting in light, knowing where this fell in that process. It sort of ties in with that.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and read it. Hell. Hell is the only word that quickly comes to mind as I scan my future for a positive sign. Where is this frog called hope? Tell me, how would it feel? Why does it evade me? I have no faith it's real. Life has been so painful, just pain at every turn. I want to start a fire and watch the whole thing burn.
This is Stigma. It's the cover photo. Thank you, Stefan, for picking it. This was the very last photo that we took on that first round of shooting. We had a grueling schedule in the middle of July. We'd been shooting over 2.5 days. We shot for about 28 hours. It was easily in the mid-90s the whole time. We were dripping with sweat. The model had left, the stylist had left. We had no idea what to do for this photo. We had 50 poems, we had 49 photos. We had executed every one of the concepts, and we had nothing for this. And we ended up doing this in that same space where we photographed Hell. It's in the back of the office. I'm the one laying on the ground. I did not need hair and makeup done. I actually looked that way after that. That's what. And because maybe I've got some deep-seated psychological problems, I put John in a wool overcoat, and it was 100 degrees in there, and I made him wear it for 15 minutes. And he had to keep running back and forth to trigger the camera because it was on an 8-second timer. I have a light in the ceiling up above, and he had tape marks on the floor where he had to get his feet just right. And if you notice, the shadow of his head is falling on my head. And the poem is a little bit about this guy looking at this guy in the gutter and seeing him as this trash, but it's maybe where he's going to end up soon. So we tried very hard to make sure that as I'm laying there looking up at the light, his head was directly between me and the light, so that I knew his head, the shadow of his head was going to fall on me, and how I could get my hand just out, just into the light, reaching. The puddle is photoshopped. The rest of it is just straight out of camera. And this is one of those things that, you know, it's just so strange because it's the only photo that we had no concept what to do with. And I know for me, it's the favorite photo I have. The first one hung up at my studio.
So most, if not all of these photos, there's just a lot of preparation involved. There are props, there's clothing, there's you know, timber and clamps, and you know, depending on what you're doing, it's amazing how difficult it can be. We had nothing for this. We got the coat. Scott just had it middle of summer, right? 100 degrees. Scott had that long coat in his office hanging up. So we grabbed that.
Been there since February.
I don't even remember where that bottle. So there's a bottle of liquor there. It's not really liquor.
The bottle came from the Airbnb.
Oh, we had brought it with
We
us.
grabbed it just in case we needed a prop.
Right. Yeah. So and we had the fog machine, which we had just used in Putney, Vermont.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, we could, you know, use the fog machine. You know, the idea is to make this look like a cold street corner, right? And we totally pulled it off. It was a very, very hot, you know.
Stupidly hot, muggy July night.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's.
So this is an area that was going to be renovated but hadn't been yet.
Yeah.
So it's in total disrepair, and so it kind of we're able to pull off that, street, back alley look, maybe winter, maybe just, really cold. So it worked. Stigma's a little bit different. The poem is more a statement about, you could say that it's about addiction. You could say that it's about the way people think about the less fortunate, and it's meant to evoke thought about the way you treat those who have these types of problems, and to think about to wonder if the way you think is right or not. Really, that's the whole point of the book, right? To analyze your thinking and to decide if it's correct, and if it's not, maybe to try to change it. Stigma. A sickening twist in the depth of the gut confirmed my overall impression. The smell, that look, and his sallow disorder, such a nasty, diseased obsession. He's a little bit off almost all the time, and oblivious to the right way. I'm consumed by disdain being near him, and think hard about what I should say. It'd be better were he to die in the street, or remanded to life in prison. Lobotomy might be the only recourse, an effective acute incision. He lamented once all he needed was help, as he twisted my gut once again. We all knew the truth. He's a blight to the world, a malignant excuse for a man.
This one is in the ascent. That's John dangling off the railroad bridge over is it Beaver Brook coming in along Route 101, that big railroad bridge where you're like 60 feet above the rocks. Yeah, John's not a rock climber. He had never done this before. He is not dangling by his fingertips without safety equipment. This is one area where we had to, I used Photoshop to remove some of the safety gear that was there. My girlfriend Arlene, her son is an expert rock climber, and he worked with us on this photo. He made sure that we were perfectly safe. He made sure that John was tied in properly. He gave John all the guidance he needed. He basically got him set up with I think you have the harness under your shorts.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing, what looks like a belt, is actually just part of the harness that he had on. He actually didn't have a belt that day. But we were able to have the rope go up behind the rock for the most part, so we could take that out. And John did, you can see his fingers are up there. He is supporting himself there, and then he's pushing out from the rock and kicking out to make it look like he's really doing that. And
It's about 50 feet up.
he is
so
holding himself there, but there was a rope. And so Drew gets him all tied in. I love this. I wish we were running video that day, because he looks at him and says, "Okay, just step off." And John's like, "Huh? Yeah, just lean back and step off." It took about 15 minutes for what Drew was saying to actually take effect.
Once I went over, I was fine. It was very strange.
Yeah.
It's just the initial, lean out and trust someone.
Trust this 22-year-old kid who I just met 10 minutes ago. Who weighs, what does he weigh, about 120 pounds? So the idea that Drew is ever going to be able to pull John up is not happening. And just as we took this shot, we took 3 or 4 photos, because I knew once he was out there we had to go quickly. We did it as quickly as we could, and just as John came up, it started raining. So we just barely got this thing in before it would have been. I wouldn't have let him go out there even with the ropes if it was raining, because not because he would have fallen, but there's just no way I would have got the shot. He might have fallen too, but mostly it was the shot.
So yeah, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we were going to get this shot done, because we had this vision of someone climbing a mountain and hanging off a cliff or a ledge or something, and there were lots of really good photos like that out there on the internet, and Who knows if they're photoshopped or not? But
And a lot of them were shot in like Moab, Utah.
yeah, we don't have Moab here in the Keene area, but we were able to. You can't tell that that's a bridge, right? And that's the look we were going for. You know, we're showing this photo not because it's one of the fantastic photos, but because there's a good story behind it, but also because the poem is kind of a turning point in the book. And so we've moved all the way to page 90 now, so we've gotten well past all the dark stuff, and it's very, very positive at this place. And so we definitely want to read a couple of positive poems for you to make you realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel here. So this one is called In the Ascent. Scaling a formidable mountainside, clarity awaits at the top. Every footfall, lucidity accrues. Arduous task, yet mustn't stop. Somehow more resilient with altitude, the earth's beauty is in full view. Comprehending more, the more we behold, the horizon constantly new. Fewer now by my side as I ascend. Some turned back, sadly others fell. Those still at it are as keen as I am, to summit strongly, I can tell. Countless ridge lines mistaken for the crest, but we harbor no discontent. The climb an evolving destiny now, and the reward in the ascent. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying before. It's that journey that's so important. If in my own experience, getting the final goal isn't the most important part. It's everything that you had to go through to get there. The best example I can give to is running a marathon. When I ran my first marathon, oh my gosh, I picked one that was one of the toughest marathons in the country, the Big Sur Marathon on the coast of California, and it was really, really, really difficult. And I cried when I crossed the finish line. It wasn't crying from pain. It wasn't crying from the sheer arduous length of it and how hard it was. It was because it was so emotional, and it was the same type of feeling as when my first child was born. That's the best comparison I can make. But that feeling doesn't come because you finished. It's because of what you just got through. And that's kind of the point of the poem. Is this the last one? All right. I'd like to read one more that we don't have a photograph for to look at, because we didn't really get into the really positive parts. And this is a poem that I wrote for my kids, and I get emotional when I read it, so you might have to deal with me tearing up a little bit. But it's called Pieces of Me, and actually we do have photos of this one, and we actually have Sophia.
Is she still here?
Oh, okay, all right. So she's in the book. She's also on some of the bookmarks that we had made, and there are a couple of photos that Sophia's in, but she's in this one, and it's just Sophia holding a big bouquet of flowers, right? But this one's called Pieces of Me. He's almost as tall as me now. It seemed to happen overnight. His voice deeper and expressing cogent, independent thoughts I engendered, some that have evolved into his own discriminating convictions and dreams. I catch myself wondering if I may soon begin to learn from him. She's more and more just like her mom, with a blithely unique, emotive personality. An ethereal love of nature and life that rivals most, a love we've shared from day one. When I gaze into her eyes, I don't need to try too hard to see pieces of me in them. I feel as if it were yesterday. Both were so dependent, so spiritually attached. Veritable extensions of my soul. But now they stray, testing the boundaries of adolescence, venturing beyond the protective barriers I so carefully constructed. And as they go, so go certain chimeric fragments of my existence. I'm hesitant to let them slip away, but I know I must, little by little, and know as well, I will somehow remain whole as long as they come back to me from time to time. So,
Real supportive friend here.
so typically these last about, the reading part lasts 20 to 30 minutes. With all this other discussion, I think it makes it much more interesting, and that was about an hour. We do have about 15 minutes for questions and answers, and by the way, there's still a bunch of food and drinks back there if anybody wants anything. So I'm gonna pause the video, and please go ahead and ask me and Scott some questions.